My first cadaver is sponsored by med school tutors. United from the far corners of Middle-earth to help students reach the highest pinnacle of medical exam scores, the MST team is truly the ultimate fellowship of tutors. If by my life or death I can help you score high, then you have my study schedule.
And my clinical knowledge.
And my axe. We don't need an axe. Oh. For every Frodo starting their adventure, there's a Samwise to have their back. Let med school tutors be part of your origin story. Together, we can save the world.
My first.
My first time?
My first big exam.
My first surgery.
Oh yeah, that was crazy.
I didn't know if I would stay. My first intubation.
My first real patient.
My first lumbar puncture.
My first suture.
Yeah, my first cadaver.
Our current medical system is a hot mess. Doctors are burning out, leaving medicine, and even taking their own lives at a staggering and devastating rate. As a concerned civilian, I wanted to try to wrap my mind around why. So for this episode, I asked, what do you want to change in medicine? In all honesty, I thought the doctors I interviewed would talk about all of the legal, insurance, and archaic institutional hoops they need to continuously jump through as practicing physicians, or about the hazing and the baptism by fire med students endure as they embark upon their clinical work and medical careers. But as this episode came together, something far different emerged. Dr. Lauren Robertson will start us off.
One of the things that is less common in medicine now that I would love to change would be to get back to having a trusting relationship between doctors and patients. And I'm not going to blame that on the legal community. I'm not going to blame that on society. It's just where we are. But I think that that fundamental nature of the doctor-patient relationship is really a very trusting and very sort of sacred thing. And when we rush it and when we put it in little check boxes and things like that, it's very impersonal and it takes that relationship nature out of it. And that's all we have left. You know, we may have the internet, we may have, medical diagnostics and things that don't require people. But the one thing that is unique to being a doctor is that your ability to have a conversation and be with that person is something that can't be replaced by a computer, because every person is different and every interaction is different. And that's not something you can put in an algorithm and spit out the right thing. That's the thing in medicine that is going away, and it makes me sad because that's what people, sort of endeared about their Norman Rockwell experience of their physician. And it can still be that way, but doctors need to take it upon themselves to work on themselves to be able to be present and be with their patient. And that's their responsibility, our responsibility as a profession. When I go to a doctor's appointment, it reminds me of how weird it is to sit in a waiting room and then go in and change into a paper outfit. And it's weird. And to always put yourself in the shoes of that patient, be like, this is not something they do every day. And they have a concern. And to be able to be with that person in that moment and not be preoccupied or not be looking at your pager or not be thinking about your next patient, but actually be present with that person is a gift to that person.
Let's go to Dr. Pranay Sinha.
Disease, for all the things that it does, causes discomfort, pain, can kill you. I think the thing it does to you the most in the hospital is it makes you lose your humanity. One of the things that happens when you get really sick and you go to the hospital, the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to lose your clothes. You're going to be in this gown. Then somebody's going to put an IV into your hand. It's like a tiny little tube, right? And then, they're going to sort of walk in and out of your room willy-nilly whenever they want to. They'll put you in these generic, terrible, blankets and sheets. You won't be using your, whatever you used at home. If you had Star Wars sheets, you won't be getting those in the hospital. And I think what I want to do with with patients more in rounds, and I think we do this at Yale, is we try to do bedside rounds. And the point of bedside rounds is to inform the patient and share our decision-making skills with them, so they can see what we're doing. Because surgeons will come and cut them and do things to them, but they don't see what we are here for, the internal medicine docs. We spend tons of time thinking about them, but they don't see that. So I think at Yale we do the bedside rounds to facilitate that, and then we sit down and we summarize, we remind them why they came to the hospital, because a lot of people forget. And at least for me, the quest is always to restore their humanity to them. And one of the ways I do that is I sit them up, make eye contact with them, and I encourage their families to bring in, stuff from home, photographs or blankets or a piece of pajama that they like to wear. But I think that is something we should do more often and more consciously. And I think that will also remind us that we are not just dealing with a piece of meat. We are dealing with a real human being feelings. There's a great article by Eric Cassell called The Nature of Suffering, in which he talks about the fact that as physicians, we end up focusing on physical malaise and physical illness and pain and suffering. But suffering has so many other dimensions. And one of my favorite things that he mentions is that every human being has a transcendent dimension. And we forget that. And people treat you pretty generically. I think rounds should do everything possible to efficiently restore the patient's humanity to them. And that's ultimately what our job as physicians is, to restore their identity, their humanity to them. That's why we do this.
Because I'm in the unique position of being a physician that got cancer at one point. And so going through the American medical system as a patient.
That's Dr. Emma Hussein.
What I'd noticed is that I would say I was treated better because there is more ability to relate to a fellow physician who happens to be ill. And so I know that on many occasions, I had a more deferential and courteous treatment, particularly by the physicians. But I would say that I really did feel like a body. I really did feel like nobody cared outside the context of it being their job to not get sued and for me not to die or have complications. But I did definitely feel like meat, just not a human. A couple of mistakes were almost made that I caught. So that was very scary because it makes me think that without medical knowledge, people are really at the mercy of their physicians who may or may not be that good, or, mistakes happen and you can't catch it if you don't know what's going on.
When you caught the mistakes that either that the medical team almost made, did you bring it to their attention? Like, was it a doctor or a nurse?
It was. The first instance was the oncologist that prescribed the wrong dose, interval, and route of administration of my chemo. They were all wrong. They were for ovarian cancer, and I had uterine. It was a related cancer to the ovarian form, but it has a different protocol. So I caught that because he'd already signed me up for the wrong protocol, but I had read all the papers. I knew that wasn't the right thing to do. So I did bring it up directly to the oncologist. But then it didn't filter through. And so when I arrived at the chemo suite, they were going to give me the original protocol. So that was the second mistake. But there wasn't a lot of, I don't know, apology. I'm not sure what the remorse, I'm not sure what the word is, but I definitely feel like nobody really was accountable for being wrong. And maybe that's because you don't need to be accountable if I fix the problem before you go through with your mistake. But nevertheless.
Mistakes in medicine. Even as a layperson, I can feel the weight of that statement. And yet, to err is human. Regardless of how small or large a mistake may be, I can only begin to fathom the kind of courage it must take for a doctor to admit that they've made a mistake, much less sit down with their patient, accept responsibility, and apologize. But where does that fit in a system or society where we place an obscene amount of pressure on our medical professionals to be perfect? How do you teach people to be human, to take a chance on being human, to take a chance on being vulnerable as a doctor? Like, where do you even
Yeah.
start?
And well, honestly, I started with some personal and professional development work, and I feel like that really helped me. It gave me some really tangible tools to be really present with what I do. And frankly, I realized about a year and a half into my private practice that I was just doing. I was just showing up and doing the job, and I wasn't feeling rewarded. I wasn't feeling good. I wasn't enjoying what I did. And when it came down to me thinking, gosh, what is it going to take for me to enjoy what I do every day? I realized that that's all about me. I don't need to change my geography or my job or my partners or my patients. I just needed to change how I was showing up for them and what those people were giving to me. And all of a sudden, it was like a shift. And I showed up to be with those people and to be a resource for those people, not with a fear that I was going to do something wrong, not with a fear that I was going to not get it right, because I don't get it right all the time. Nobody does. But to have that ability to say that to a person and to be with that person and say, look, these are the three things that could happen, and I'm not sure what's going to happen. But this is what we're going to try, and if it doesn't work, we're going to go on to something next because I'm committed to you feeling better. That 10-second interaction makes that person feel heard and makes that person know that you are listening to them and you're able to articulate what their concerns are because you sat with them and you listened. It's a very hard conversation to have with people when things go poorly. As if the mistake or the error weren't punishing enough, there's a lot that comes with that makes your humanity come out. And your humanity says, I want to protect myself and I want to hide. So what happens is people cover stuff up and people blame other people or people make excuses. And when you're sitting on the other end of that as a patient, it just feels really unsatisfying. And even though it feels like the harder route to say, hey, you know what, I made a mistake and I take responsibility for it and I'm really sorry, 99% of the time, the patient will look at you and go, okay, that's okay. And you won't end up in court and you won't end up in trouble and whatever. I mean, I've had that happen with a couple of patients where things have gone poorly. And by being completely open and honest, which of course makes me feel nauseous because you're just sitting there in front of someone saying, I made a mistake, every outcome that I've had is the patient's understood and they've been okay with it. And there hasn't been a problem because I've taken responsibility for what's happened and not made excuses and not covered anything up. And I think that's what you can promise a patient is to say, look, this happened and here's what we're doing to make sure this doesn't happen to anybody else. But that's something that has not penetrated medical education, has not penetrated, frankly, just the medical community in general, because there are those outlying stories of patients that are still really ticked off and they file a lawsuit or whatever. And frankly, that's their right, and that's just how the system works. But by and large, it's that whole thing your mom teaches you when you're 5 and trying to steal gum from the, plaid pantry down the street, which is honesty is the best policy. And it still holds. It holds when you're wearing a white coat, and it holds when you're, rear end someone parallel parking your car.
As a physician, you don't know everything, and the worst thing you can be is too proud. The best thing to do is look things up. Say to a patient, that's a very good question. I don't actually know the answer to that, but I'm going to find out for you. And looking for it in that moment or looking for it afterwards. Admitting mistakes. And a lot of mistakes get made because people don't double check because they're too proud. Pride is a really terrible thing in medicine. And, being a physician is an important job. And I just think that needs to be tempered with humility and the understanding that you're still a person, and that even if you've reached these great heights of education and profession, that you're just as likely to make terrible mistakes as you were before you became a physician, when you were still just a citizen. And being proud or arrogant or having a elevated view of your position in humanity is a really, really bad way to go with this. Not just because you won't be a very successful psychosocial physician, but also because you're going to make a mistake. You're going to get sued at some point because you didn't check. You were too proud to ask, double check, look something up. Being a generous person is its own reward. It rewards you a thousandfold in all of the things that come back to you. And it's a far better selfish tactic than actually being selfish. I think if you're generous, you actually get more out of other people than if you're just looking after number one. So it ends up having this paradoxical effect. And when you're generous with your patients, and I know there's only a certain amount of time that you can spend with a patient. So I don't mean generous with time, but being generous with energy and attention and compassion, which could fit in the same amount of time as a non compassionate, non empathetic patient visit, makes a more positive dynamic, which leads to the appointment being a more positive thing, which leads to the patient giving the physician positive attention and energy, which leads to the physician feeling a little bit better, more satisfied. He or she feels like, I did a good job here. So it's actually just easier to remember that if you're kind, your day will go better, not just the patient's day. And the more that you treat a patient like a person, the more they will not treat you like a service.
I think that the more that people can just be brave enough to see each other as human beings, whether they're talking to their doctor or lawyer or friend or family member or whatever,
Right.
or to be brave enough just to let yourself be human in the first place, you know?
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's the biggest challenge for all of us, really.
Yeah. And I think there's a big fear that if you do that, you'll be vulnerable, you'll be exposed, and then someone will take advantage of that. And I'd like to propose that it's actually the opposite. That you'll actually be respected, you'll be listened to as a person of integrity. And a big concern of physicians is, I don't have time. I don't have time to sit and listen to people talk, talk, talk. And there was a study done where they looked at how long the patient talked before they were done. The average patient talked for less than 60 seconds, uninterrupted. And when I heard that, it made sense to me in med school, but I didn't actually put it into practice until I was comfortable enough with myself to shut up. And that's a hard thing to do. And when you do it, it's priceless because you get exactly the information from people that you want out of those questions. And it may not come in the direction that you had planned, but you get it, and that person feels listened to. Because when people are able to talk uninterrupted, they feel heard. And when you're able to articulate back to them what they said, it's even better. And it's efficient. With the advent of electronic charting, we've asked you to chart and talk to a person all at the same time. And for a lot of people, that's very difficult to do. I've worked with a couple physicians who do it really, really well, but it takes an effort. So it is being mindful, and it is trying not to multitask.
Even people who think they can,
Yeah.
even then, your efficiency is just terrible.
It's very poor.
Yeah.
Your efficiency is very poor. I mean, there's a lot of kind of social science and neuroscience research being done right now in this whole texting phenomenon. And we're demonstrating that all of this distraction, even if you think you're dealing with it, is taking you away from being efficient at your task at hand. And we're dealing with that in medicine too. We're dealing with it everywhere.
There's one more thing about being a patient that it sounds obvious, but I think it's worth mentioning. It's really scary. I'd been healthy my whole life and suddenly I had cancer. Obviously, I thought that I was going to be one of those people that didn't get cancer because that's what we all think. We all think that it's not going to happen to us, and then it does. And it's terrifying. And I think it's good to know as a physician that you may not be dealing with the best version of this person right now. In other words, maybe I am able to deal with a cold hearted, uncompassionate individual when I am my best version of myself, but I wasn't. And so all of those things hurt a lot more. The lack of empathy, the lack of compassion, the lack of respect, the lack of politeness, the lack of caring, the lack of humanity, those things all were much more disturbing when I was a patient than they are when I'm traveling on the metro or, trying to buy something at Walmart. There, it doesn't seem to be an issue because stakes are lower. So a little goes a long way with compassion, just to put that patient at ease. Yeah.
When you had asked me, Faith, about what I would change in medicine, I think the thing that is the most frustrating about medicine right now is the fact that not everyone can access it equally. And because we've made a system in this country that not everyone can go to the doctor, or if you do go to the doctor, it's prohibitively expensive, or if you don't have insurance and you show up to an emergency department, the whole society pays for it. It's just super screwed up. It is a basic human right to be able to care for your body and to have a system in the most developed country in the world, in the richest country in the world, where we have millions of people, even now, who cannot access insurance, is embarrassing. And it's embarrassing that we have technology that costs millions of dollars that we're treating one person with, and we have people who can't have a primary care visit. It makes my head spin. And it's an environment that's been predicated by private insurance and lobbyists and the drug market. Direct to consumer advertising in the early 90s was probably the worst thing that's ever happened to medicine. And that whole market aspect of the way that we run our medical system has put the dollar in front of the person. We just got to decide at some point what our priorities are. And I really don't want it to take a big crisis in medicine or people getting really sick or something really awful happening before we change it. But gosh, I want to see it change because we have an amazing, amazing population of doctors in the United States that are dedicated and that have frankly put their lives on hold to do their education so that they can be this person for other people on the planet. And we need to make that accessible to every single person.
We could have spent the entire episode on this topic. However, the team and I decided to distill it down for this episode so we could start a larger conversation that'll be devoted to this topic for a later episode. For now, to wrap up, let's go back to Pranay.
There's actually a physiological basis to the placebo effect. The mind and the body are not separate. The mind is in the body. So clearly, if you do something to the mind, you will do something to the body. And that is the same effect that we invoke when we wear white coats and we have these plausible demeanors and we are confident about our therapies. We make eye contact, we hold their hands and reassure them. We don't just do that. I don't know if everybody consciously does that to evoke a placebo effect, but we should. And what I was getting to was that some doctors are not potentially the best informed, or they may not be picking the best therapies consistently for their patients, but they have the best demeanors, and their patients love them. And I've definitely come across people like that in my travels. And there's some amazing physicians who just never make a mark on their patients because they don't connect with them that way, and they don't have that placebo effect. And there's a lot of good studies that show that even things that don't work often work just because people believe in them. So that's why I thought we should be very cognizant that when we walk into that patient's room, we are putting on an act, we're putting on a character, persona, and that persona has healing potential, and we should never forget that.
Whether you're a doctor or a high school student, it's easy to feel like a victim, to convince yourself not to take a stand because you believe you're powerless. But where does your power truly live? Yes, when it comes to medicine, the system is broken and oppressive and breaking doctors left and right. But we can all start small to make a bigger change. Start by getting back in touch with your own humanity, your passions, your calling, your spark. Heal yourself so that you can continue to heal others. Talk about your mistakes. Care for yourself. Be gentle with yourself and firmly stand up for what you believe is right. If you speak your truth and lead by example, you'll inspire others around you to do the same. And by doing this, by tapping back into your true power, you will actually begin to change the broken system in the process, one vulnerable human step at a time. Thank you to Doctors Lauren Robertson, Emma Hussein, and Pranay Sinha, the My First Cadaver team, Papa Claire Music and Compulsion Music, our Nerf blasting friends at Salted Stone, and special thanks to Robert Meekins, who is not a doctor. Stay tuned for episode 10, coming soon to a listening device near you. Want to join the conversation or start one? Get in touch with us through our website, myfirstcadaver.com, or via email at info@myfirstcadaver.com. And remember, guys, don't try to demonstrate that your 24th floor office windows are unbreakable, or you could become someone's first cadaver.